trade deals with countries including the United States will inevitably be more difficult if Britain cozies up to Brussels, fears Mark Littlewood. Britain may actually end up in a worse situation than when it was a member of the European Union if Sir Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister later this year, a Tory strategist has warned. Mark Littlewood, chairman of the Popular Conservatism Group, which includes MPs such as former Prime Minister Liz Truss and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, also said there is a danger of Britain ending up trapped in what he said fellow non-EU members Norway once referred to as fax democracy. Earlier this week Mr Littlewood was quizzed by former Brexit Party MEP Martin Daubney on GB News about ex-Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair's suggestion that a future Labour government needed to reset the country's relationship with Brussels. Mr Littlewood, former Director General of the Institute for Economic Affairs, told Express.co.uk, "My view of it is that the whole sort of relationship with the EU is on a spectrum. So one question is, are you a member of the EU? Well, we no longer are. So that's one end of the spectrum. But even when we were a member of the EU and had a range of opt-outs on things like social chapter initially, until Blair waived that, and on the single currency of course. Now we're out. I'm not expecting if there is a Labour government for them to apply to rejoin the EU. I know there are some anxious about that, but I don't think that will happen. But I think that we might find that rather than our old relationship that we got used to, that we were members with a load of opt-outs, we become non-members with a load of opt-ins. As a result, the temptation might be to align pharmaceutical standards, veterinary standards, or rules on climate," Mr Littlewood suggested. Considering the impact of a Labour government, he continued, "I don't think we would completely rejoin the single market, but inch by inch, they might say, we're going to align our regulatory standards with this European agency, or we're going to align our regulatory standards with that agency. We've agreed to review through this committee every year to ensure that there isn't divergence." That's the direction I would expect Labour to go in, not the whole enchilada, but as I say, on the outside, opting in rather than on the inside opting out. Asked whether such a situation would be even worse than the EU membership the UK voted to relinquish in 2016, Mr Littlewood said, "That's the danger. I mean, I kind of always thought, and indeed, way back in the day I was enthusiastic about full-blown membership, because at least we'd have a seat around the table. There is a danger that you get, I think, what the Norwegians once called fax democracy, where you basically get faxed from the EU all the things you've got to do and you haven't even got a seat around the table to protest or vote against it. That is the danger." Perhaps more significantly in a modern context, closer ties to the EU made it more difficult to strike trade deals with non-EU countries, Mr Littlewood pointed out. He said, "This was why I got infuriated with Remainers who kept making this point that the EU is our biggest trade partner and that therefore, the first thing we've got to do is to align as much as possible with the EU to ensure the free flow of goods and services between the EU and the UK. Sounds great on the face of it, but the problem is that our trade with the EU is, although big, declining, year on year.